So on Wednesday, we talked about the Blue Jackets draft, and we started to get into their prospect pool in general. We're continuing that conversation today with Tony Ferrari from the Hockey News, and we're going to talk about a bunch of different prospects, some that you might expect, some that you might not, but that's all coming up today on Locked on Blue Jackets.
Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you news, stories, excitement, tragedy, everything in between about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube. So if you haven't checked us out over there, then feel free to do so. We super appreciate it. Locked on Blue Jackets is never going to be behind a paywall, and that is our promise to you. So let's get into today's episode. On Wednesday, we sat down with Tony Ferrari. We talked a little bit about the draft that just happened, some of the later round picks who we're excited about, and then we started to get into the prospect pool in general. Tony wrote a really great article about how good the Blue Jackets prospect pool is, and so today we're going to talk a little bit more detail about maybe some names that don't get as much talk as, you know, the Kent Johnsons or the David Juraceks of the prospect pool. So we're going to talk about centers, we're going to talk about goaltenders, and just we're going to have some fun with it, I think. So I'll get right into it. Something else I want to talk about in the article is, and you talked about it a little bit before, the Blue Jackets kind of have prospects at every position, but the big thing with the Blue Jackets, and it has been for a few years now, center depth. Blue Jackets have, on their roster right now, the Blue Jackets have probably 4 middle six centers. They don't have a number one center at the minute. I feel like they're probably going to have some competition for that. It's either, Cole Sillinger, Boone Jenner, maybe Jack Roslovic on that top line, everyone competing to play between Gaudreau and Laine. And I don't necessarily think that you need, I've kind of talked about this a little bit on previous episodes, I don't know that you necessarily need a top line center to play with between those two guys. You could probably put me on that center position and I would do okay between Gaudreau and Laine. But is there anyone in the Blue Jackets kind of prospect pool that you think has that potential to be that top line center?
I think Cole Sillinger can be a top line center. Would I want to necessarily play him with those two guys? I think he'd be a really good fit in terms of being able to kind of do a little bit of everything. I think Gaudreau showed his goal scoring touch last year, but he is primarily more of a playmaker. Laine is Patrik Laine. He's going to try to put up 40.
He's got one trick and he's real good at it.
Yeah, he does one thing extremely well, and you love to see it. And I think Gaudreau and him together are going to create some magic. So do I want to see a Cole Sillinger there? I don't know. I think that's kind of a situation where I'm like, yes, he could be your number one center, but maybe he plays on the second line. Maybe he's a guy that you do put with a guy like Kent Johnson in another winger, and you go from there and you worry about that. And you put a guy like Jack Roslovic there. I think that would be a really good fit between those two guys. I know he's not a prospect necessarily, but he's a guy that I think fits well there because he can do a little bit of everything, and he's not going to be like asking for the puck too much. And I think that's the big thing with that line is you have two guys who want the puck all the time, whether it's Laine to shoot it or Gaudreau to do everything with it. You don't have to worry about Jack Roslovic worrying about getting the puck too often. So I think a guy like Cole Sillinger, you want him to have the puck more often. You want him to want the puck more often. Put him on the second line. Let him kind of do a line himself. Like, give yourself a Cole Sillinger line. Don't force him to be on the Johnny Gaudreau line.
Yeah, for sure. I will say on the subject of kind of Cole Sillinger and who he should play with, I am glad that the Blue Jackets managed to re-sign Patrik Laine. I am furious that they robbed me of the Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, Oliver Bjorkstrand line that I have been pushing for all off-season. So, would I rather have Patrik Laine or Oliver Bjorkstrand? Probably Patrik Laine, but I'm still mad about it. Coming up in a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Tony, but first I've got to tell you all about Built Bar, because if you haven't tried Built Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There is a brand new flavor. Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. And that's right, Built has done it again. Your new favorite bar is here. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light, chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, like all Built bars, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's good for you. They are only 160 calories per bar. They've got 15 grams of protein in them. So run to Built.com right now to snag a box for yourself and the family. It'll be the perfect treat. Or you can do what I do, just find a really good hiding place and hoard them for yourself. Like all Built bars, covered in 100% real chocolate, they are healthy and tasty. And what's great about Built Bar is that all of their bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. So you can eat something that tastes good and is good for you, whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or you just need to grab a quick bite. Built is the perfect protein bar and they taste better than a candy bar. So ditch the calories, fat, and sugar and grab yourself a Built bar. And here's the best bit. If you go to Built.com, you can use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Once again, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Who else is kind of in the system? So you mentioned a couple of names. I think you mentioned Tyler Angle and Liam Foodie and one other guy that I'm forgetting for kind of prospect at center. Do you see any of those guys kind of playing in the NHL in that center position? Because I know a lot of centers end up going to the wing because there's more room, because, like you look at the Kent Johnson, who was listed as a center and then played wing his entire college career. So is there anyone in that kind of prospect pool that you think could be maybe not that top line center, but who could be an NHL center? Because at this point, the Blue Jackets just kind of need those.
Yeah. I think Tyler Angle is an interesting guy for a bottom six as an energy line center. I think he played really well at center in the OHL. He plays a little bit at center in the AHL, but he also plays on the wing there. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see where he does land at the NHL level and if he actually makes the NHL level, because he did take a little bit of a step back last year. I think a guy like Liam Foodie could be a really reliable bottom six center as well. I think he's a guy that plays with some decent speed, plays with some pace, attacks the net when he's at his best. And I think that's a guy that you look at and you go, he's not necessarily going to drive play and be this dominating force offensively, but he's going to make a lot of the right plays. He's going to push the play into the offensive zone, even if he's not generating offense himself necessarily. So I think he's a guy that could play at the bottom six center. And at the end of the day, the guy that he just drafted, Luca Del Bel, believes is a really good offensive player. I don't know if his skating is going to allow him to play center, but he has a lot of the traits that can make him a good center. He plays with a little bit of power, plays with some really high-end offensive tools, really good shooter, just absolute bomb of a shot. And I think that's something that could kind of project him to the NHL level as a center. His skating is an issue, though. I think that's going to be the thing that holds him back from being a center. So do I think they have a center that can kind of fit into that middle six? Jack Roslovic's a really fun player. I like Jack Roslovic, so I'll go with him. But yeah, I think the center depth is probably their weak point in their prospect pool, even though they do have a couple guys that I think might play center at the NHL level. It's just probably not going to be all that high up the lineup. Yeah, I feel like that's been the big thing for the Blue Jackets is they have a fair amount of centers. They just don't really have even the top six center depth. Obviously Cole Sillinger will probably be fine on that second line, could play on the top line, but we don't have that guy, which could get interesting. And people love to remind Blue Jackets fans of it when we get excited. They're like, well, you don't have a Sidney Crosby or a Austin Matthews or a Nate McKinnon. And I'm like, yeah, we have Gaudreau and Laine. It's going to be fine, guys. Calm down. In terms of just kind of elsewhere in the prospect pool, I want to talk about goaltending. And I know goaltending is voodoo and you can't ever really be like, hey, this guy's going to hit, this guy's going to miss. But you talked about, obviously, Daniil Tarasov, fairly good goaltending prospect. They picked up another goalie in this draft. And I feel like the Blue Jackets goaltending depth went from being really quite good to being fairly poor. How do you think the goaltending depth is at the minute? Yeah, I think they went from having a lot of really good young goaltenders to having a couple of question marks. I think Ivanov's a pretty decent young goalie. He's not a guy that is going to dominate, I don't think, but he's a guy that has some skill. The problem is he's 5'11". I think that's something that NHL teams shy away from a lot when they're drafting goalies, and I think that's why Ivanov fell. Even though he came into the year as kind of one of those guys where people were like, well, maybe he's the top goalie in this draft class. But at the end of the day, this draft class didn't really have any goalies that are like really studs or guys that you can really rely on. There was no Yaroslav Askarov or Jesper Wallstedt or a Spencer Knight. There wasn't a guy like that, or even a Spencer Kosa that you look at and you're like, that's a future NHL starter for sure. I think Ivanov's got a really good skill set. He's really technically sound. He's got a lot of athleticism. Like I said, that 5'11" frame is the biggest hindrance on him. I think last year, looking at his stats right now, he had a 928 save percentage, just a really good save percentage in the MHL. He was on a good team as well, which helps and everything. So it's not like he was this guy that was just saving his team's bacon all the time. And then with Daniil Tarasov, I think that's a guy that at the end of the day, he's been a really good prospect for the Blue Jackets. I think he's a guy that probably plays in the NHL. He's a guy that probably ends up challenging for starts eventually. When that's going to be the question. I think the Blue Jackets have some really good goalies right now. It's going to be interesting to see what he does, because I mean, Tarasov in his 4 games at the NHL level last year had a 937, but then in the AHL he was an 893. So goalies are a little bit up and down. Sometimes at the AHL level, you don't have the defensive structure in front of you to be able to play your game to the best of your abilities. So your numbers do kind of fluctuate up and down there. So I think this is a guy that at the end of, like, if he's challenging for a starting job in a year or two, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I do think he is an NHL goalie at the end of the day. So I think, although the goalie depth isn't quite what it used to be, I think Tarasov's a really good goaltender to have in the system. And a lot of teams, you look around, whether it's a Toronto, a Montreal, an Ottawa, even, you don't have that goalie in the system like Tarasov is. So you look at Tarasov and you're pretty happy with that guy there. And then who knows, maybe Ivanov's the next Yaroslav Halak, who's a 5'11" goalie who kind of finds some success at the NHL level.
Coming up in a minute, I've got the end of my conversation with Tony about Blue Jacket prospects. Yeah, as a goalie who is 5'10" on a good day, I always support small goalies doing well. Big UC Saros fan, for example. And I feel like people kind of get twitchy about the goalie position, and then you realize that you only need 2 goalies on the team. You know, it's not like wingers where you need 8 NHL level wingers. Like, you have Tarasov, and then in a couple of years, maybe Ivanov steps up. By the time he's ready, the Blue Jackets will probably have another goalie in the system. You don't need like a million good goalie prospects. I don't
exactly.
Think. Probably better to have them, but
yeah. Oh, it's great to have them. But at the end of the day, I think the goalie prospect is, if you have 1 or 2 that are pretty good goalie prospects, which I think the Columbus Blue Jackets do have at this point, you don't have to worry about it too much, because hopefully one of those guys becomes a starter. And then, let's be honest, signing a backup goalie is kind of a dime a dozen in the NHL nowadays. You can go for a high-end guy like Yaroslav Halak, or you go for a guy like Curtis McElhinney circa a few years ago, and you just hope that he can kind of play and give you serviceable NHL games, and at the end of the day, not lose you games. And I think you can sign those guys with pretty much ease and sign them for $1 million, under $2 million, and you're pretty happy with that. So really, you only need 1 guy to work out in your whole prospect pool. And if you draft a goalie every year, every couple of years, you're probably going to find a guy.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anyone kind of in the Blue Jackets prospect pool that maybe isn't, we kind of talked about a couple of guys that are kind of a little bit under talked about. Is there anyone that we kind of haven't mentioned that you are like, hey, this guy could be a real kind of steal, I guess? Is there anyone that you think hasn't had the attention that they maybe should do at this stage?
I think the one guy I'll mention is Corson Kuhlman. He's the boomer bust guy. I think he's either going to be a really nice number 1, 2, or 3 NHL defenseman, or he's going to be a guy that just rips up the AHL and kind of has a great career down there. He's got all the tools in the world. He's a good skater. He's an excellent offensive mind. He loves to push the pace offensively and kind of get in some shots, use his passing ability to kind of find guys in the back door and everything. But there are some times where you're like, what are you doing? Like, you just question his decision-making at times as well. So he's in college, and you hope he kind of works it out there, and you let him kind of develop, let him take his time and everything. But he's a really good toolsy guy. He's got everything you want to see in a defenseman. He's got size, he's got skating, he's got the offensive ability. He can kind of crush guys along the boards when he decides to engage physically. He can make a great breakout pass, hit a guy in stride up through the neutral zone. So you want to see him work out. And then another guy that I think really doesn't get talked about as much as he should is Kirill Marchenko. And I think it's just because he's kind of feels like he's been around forever, but he's a guy that has a ton of skill, some goal scoring ability, some playmaking ability. I would love to see this guy work out. Why he hasn't at this point, I couldn't tell you, but he's a guy that I won't be shocked if all of a sudden he pops off in the middle of the year, gets a call up or gets to the league, and you're like, okay, like Kirill Marchenko, like, yeah, this guy is a guy that we've been expecting to do this for a couple of years now, and he's finally doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super excited about Marchenko. This is going to be his first year in North America. People are kind of slotting him in on the third line. I think that would be pretty fun. But one final question, and that kind of ties into this. Who on the Blue Jackets kind of list of prospects are you most excited to see in the NHL this season?
This season, maybe
Or,
this is
well,
kinda,
in the next couple of
yeah.
seasons,
I
maybe.
was gonna say maybe this is kind of banking on your hot take there, but I'm gonna say David Juracek. This is a guy that I think if he didn't get hurt at the abbreviated World Juniors that we had in the winter, I think he probably would have been the top defenseman taken. He was my top defenseman on my board, and I think he has all of the tools to be that top pairing guy at the end of the day. And he's really, in my opinion, him and Nemec were the only two guys that I thought had top pairing upside in any assurance that they'd get there. And I think Juracek, in my opinion, was the guy that projected better. So I think with his ability to be a good defensive presence, to be a physical guy, use his body, use his snarl, use his nasty streak in his own end, and then have the ability to be offensive as well and affect the game in transition. Like Juracek's ability to kind of go into the offensive zone, skate the umbrella, walk the blue line, attack down the lanes, and use the space that the opponents are giving him is something that I really love about his game. And the big thing between him and Nemec that I used to separate Juracek was Nemec at times would be a little bit tepid. He would take advantage of space when there was just an exorbitant amount of space because the Slovakian league was pretty bad, if we're being completely honest. So yeah, he put up some offensive numbers, but with Juracek, he was attacking space. He was taking it for himself, whether there was a guy there or not. He's a guy that understands how to just completely manipulate opposing defenders and forwards, especially when he's kind of going into the offensive zone. So I think this is a guy that has the aggression offensively and defensively that you like to see. So I think if he's a guy that, like you said, hot take, maybe he makes the NHL this year, I wouldn't be shocked, because if he didn't get hurt, I'd almost say he's probably the most NHL ready player in this draft, which is weird to say about defensemen because that's not that often.
Yeah, I'm sticking to my hot take. I think he makes the opening night roster. I really do. I'm super excited about David Juracek. For people who want to learn more about prospects, who want to catch up on maybe other prospect pools, or if they want to read the Blue Jackets prospect pool article that you wrote, which I do highly recommend. I had a great time reading it. Where can people find you and your stuff on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at the Tony Ferrari. All of the prospect pools are going to be broken down over the next 32 days, or what day are we on? Like 8, something like that. Now it's wild. It's been a fun time writing all these and diving into each prospect pool. But the Blue Jackets was probably one of my favorites to do. And that's not just saying that because I'm on the Blue Jackets podcast. I'm actually serious about that because they were such an interesting little study of going through and going, wow, Yarmo really just got really aggressive, took it down, and then attacked the prospect pool and loaded right back up. And seeing that kind of stuff is what I love to see. You want to see general managers sometimes treat the NHL like a video game, and that's what Yarmo did a couple years ago, and then loaded up the prospect pool after that. So it's a really fun prospect pool. But you can find all those at the Hockey News. I'm tweeting them all out as well, so you can definitely check them out on my Twitter.
Yeah, Yarmo is a go big or go home guy that just doesn't really like to go home very often, and I appreciate that about him, and I appreciate you for coming to talk to me about all of these prospects. Always have a blast talking to Tony about the baby Blue Jackets, potential baby Blue Jackets, and kind of everything in between. So thanks for coming to give us your knowledge.
Anytime.
So that's all I've got for you today. On Monday, I'll be bringing you my conversation with Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks. We are doing a squad cast. With it being about a year since the Seth Jones trade, I thought we would look back, look at how Seth Jones' season went, look at now that the Blue Jackets have made their final selection with the draft picks that they got, really weighing up the trade after a year to see, is there a winner? Is there a loser? And was the trade worth it for both teams? So that's coming up on Monday. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at LO_Blue Jackets. Nope, that's the podcast Twitter. You can find the podcast there. You can find me at _Jacob Foster, JAKOB FORSTER. You can find the podcast over at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube. If you have comments, questions, emails, you can send those over to lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for making this your first listen of the day every day. Super, super, super appreciate it. The listens went through the roof in the month of July, and I'm just really grateful that everyone seems to be enjoying the show. And until Monday, make sure you stay locked on.